My name is Parisa Wright, and what some of you might be able to tell from my name is that I was lucky enough to have been brought up with Persian heritage and English heritage. In 1980, my amazing Iranian grandmother, my maman bozorge, helped to raise me and then my sister when my mum returned to work. She was the warmest soul you could ever hope to meet. She would help anyone in her community every way she could. If you said you liked something, she wanted to give it to you immediately. And she became really well known in the community of Bellingham in Lewisham, where she lived after she'd had a lifetime in Iran. I was so lucky to be raised by her. She was well known in the community, and she brought us up with this sense of belonging, but also this sense that we had to have service for our neighbours, for our community, care for those in need at the heart of who we were. That's what she taught us in word and in deed. And I was very lucky to be brought up there. And as a result of being brought up there, I also saw how people of different cultures and different colours were being treated. And I saw how people in Iran were dealing with human rights violation on a day-to-day basis. And there, as a child, I vowed inwardly that I would find a way to protect those that I loved and the vulnerable that I could see. And so I vowed to become a lawyer. Food. Food is a big deal in the Persian culture. We are feeders. And my grandmother was the ultimate family matriarch. She would make sure all of her grandchildren were fed every day of the week. And then once a week, she'd bring all the aunts and uncles and cousins and friends of the family into her house in Bellingham and feed everybody. And there would be plates filled high with fluffy rice and lamb and crunchy tahdig and herbs from her garden. And if you were a guest and you refused a second plate, well, she would feign offense and say that you obviously hadn't liked it enough, darling. And obviously you just have to eat it and smile, and you would enjoy it. I did end up going into the law, and inspired by my grandmother, I specialized in human rights. But after a couple of years, I had to pay my rent, and I ended up going into entertainment law. And that's where I was in 2018. I was working in television. In fact, I was on maternity leave from television as a lawyer. And I was at home with my baby, my youngest, Rose, and I just started seeing a pattern of news stories on television. And it was essentially a pattern of children out of school begging adults to take action on climate change. And I watched in awe and in horror as 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 15-year-olds and students had to set aside their schooling, had to set aside their toys and their games, had to set aside their childhood, their innocence, basically, to beg adults to step up and take responsibility, to protect them. And I started questioning myself. How had I missed the biggest human rights issue of our time creeping up on me in the last 20 years? How had I been so oblivious to the consequences of my actions, and more importantly, the consequences of the inaction of those in charge? How could it have come to 6-year-olds getting me to realize what was going on, begging us adults to do something, begging their parents to protect them, and begging those in charge to change their ways and start taking responsibility for the human lives in their hands and offering them a future that they could actually look forward to rather than fear? My husband and I had a moment. One evening, the baby had fallen asleep. We'd just been watching the news. She was on the sofa. We were on the sofa. She was sleeping. The toddler was upstairs sleeping. And we turned to each other, and we both had tears in our eyes. And my husband doesn't cry. And he said, have we been selfish? And he didn't mean, have we been selfish because of the carbon footprint of these children? What he meant was, have we been selfish bringing these sweet little souls into this world where 6-year-olds are having to beg society to do something? Is this what our baby and our 2-year-old are going to have to grow up in? Because we're looking around us and we're not seeing anything changing. How different will it be for them in 5 years' time? And honestly, not. But we had to sit with that feeling of guilt, that feeling of despair, that feeling of anxiety. And I know a lot of us don't talk about that because it's not cool to talk about anxiety about the climate because maybe that feels a bit extreme, but I think a lot of us here deep down have that anxiety. Whether it's because we have relatives abroad in countries that are already being hit, or whether it's just because we know it's going to affect the little ones that we love. And so we just had to say to ourselves, there is no point, it doesn't serve them, it doesn't serve any of the children or vulnerable to allow ourselves to wallow in this horror and this depression. The only thing we can do is try to do better and to act. And something that I hear a lot from people, certainly for the last 5 years, has been, I can't do something, we have a 4x4, or we've always traveled a lot in the past. I just want to desperately say to them and to say to everybody, it doesn't matter what you have done in the past. I can't change that, you can't change that. Let's not waste energy on that. All you can do is decide to change and do something different going forward to better protect those you love and your community. So what did I do? I went back to work, and I went straight to the waste management team, and I went straight to the lovely lady who had been appointed to look at sustainability. I was lucky, I was in a big company, so they had someone like that. And I said, what are we doing, and what can I do to help? And then I came back to my community, and I put something out there. I thought, recycling, we know. This is not going to save our children. It's not going to make a huge difference, but it's a good way to start the conversation. People understand it, people are comfortable with it, and so I created an A to Z of donation and recycling. The idea being that a lot of us dump things in the rubbish dump or dump things on charity shops without thinking that maybe there are groups, homeless shelters, women's refuges, refugees, and different charities in the communities who would actually benefit from those specific items. And when I put that out on Facebook and on different social media platforms, people came back and they were relieved. Because here was another person saying, I'm anxious about this. This is where I'm trying to start. What do you guys think? And they were like, I'm anxious too. And I didn't know where to start too, but this looks great. And started asking, what can we do together in our community? How can we use our professional skills, our life skills together? And so we created a community group called Greener and Cleaner. And the idea was that everyone from our community in South East London, from Bromley, Lewisham, Greenwich, everyone who wanted to get involved could get involved to whatever extent, and they could share their professional skills, they could share their life skills, they could give advice, and they could teach people how to sew, how to mend, how to compost, how to insulate their homes, because we could help each other as a community. And it went from 20 people meeting above a pub and organising a sew-a-thon to thousands of people. Literally within about 3 months, thousands of people were involved. And as thousands of strangers came on board, I started to go back to my family and my friends, and I said, you know, come on, let's do this. And I got this sort of pushback, which I'd heard a lot in the community, and that was, but is this really relevant to us? They pointed to me to the press, who said that this is only for middle-class people, it's a hobby, it's a luxury. And then they said, can we even afford to do this? And that's a reasonable question, because all we hear about when it comes to dealing with climate and sustainable living is solar panels and electric vehicles. So what did we do? First of all, we started talking about what they were already doing, because there's no one in this room, there's no one who will watch this video who isn't already doing something. Some of them were already sewing and mending, some of them were cooking from scratch and growing their vegetables, some of them were taking the bus all the time or walking, some of them had learned to make sort of energy improvement measures in their homes with no cost. And so they were already doing things. Then we started looking at all the amazing grassroots campaigners and charities at a local level across South East London, across all of London, across the UK, who came from very diverse backgrounds, but we never heard about in the media. And then finally, I looked at my own heritage. And more widely than that, we looked at health and we looked at cost of living. So for health, if you have, like I do, a Middle Eastern background, or if you have an Asian background or an African background, we are more vulnerable to respiratory conditions. We saw that in COVID. Therefore, we are more vulnerable to air pollution, and yet, as a whole, those groups are more likely to live on the busiest, most polluted roads in the UK and in the US. Those groups also have a higher vulnerability to obesity and to diabetes. So when it's not safe to walk and cycle, and when we don't have enough public transport and we're all in cars, obviously that doesn't help with that vulnerability and it affects us more. When, as a country, we have started to mimic the US in terms of our eating habits and supersize me every meal, and we're eating almost double the safe levels of meat and dairy that the NHS says we should be eating, then obviously that's going to affect all the obesity and diabetes levels in this country, but especially the groups who are particularly vulnerable. So yes, sustainability is for everybody. It's not for a middle-class eco-stereotype. Breathing, eating. Eating. The cost of food goes up when we have floods and droughts. Look at Scotland, it's underwater right now. It's 23 degrees in the UK in October, and the whole of Europe has been on fire this summer. How does that affect farms? How does that affect factories? It makes everything more expensive. And who does that affect more? Middle-class people? Wealthy people? Not really, not in the same way as it affects people who are dealing with the cost of living and poverty day to day, the people who have to decide whether to feed their children or heat their homes. And it's the same thing. Those same people, who are not the stereotype, have the least well-insulated homes and struggle most when we have these extremes of cold in the winter and extremes of heat in the summer. How do they balance those increased bills and those increased bills of food and increased bills of energy? Sustainability really is for everyone. And so, as our community group grew, with amazing people from all over South East London and beyond, coming forward and saying, I'm a graphic designer, I'm a lawyer, I'm a mum who's run PTA events, I know how to sew, I know how to pickle. It grew and people shared advice and tips, and we became a charity. And then we set up a community hub in a mainstream shopping centre, not in the back of a church hall, not in the back of a civic centre, front and centre, where everyone could be part of it, everyone could see it, and everyone could see it day to day. And we created that community hub, and now 1,000 people every month come through it. It's open 5 days a week. People have part-time jobs there. People have got work experience there. People come for workshops every day, and it's all free. And that's the community serving the community. And so last year, in 2022, having tried to do all this with an amazing community, but also a full-time job, I left my legal career of 20 years. I left it because I felt that the best thing I could do with the time I had left here, for my children, for all the children, for the vulnerable people my grandmother taught me to care about, and who I really would passionately fight for. The best thing I could do would be to see what we could do as a charity to grow our model and to share our learnings with communities across the UK. How can you make a community project about the environment that is for everyone? How do you get everyone involved, and then how can we create a blueprint so that we can just give it out and people can do their own thing, use it perfectly as is, use bits of it, but how can we empower the community? And that's why I left my legal career, because that's what I want to do with my skills. And so I was extremely lucky, having learned all these things from my community that essentially helped me save money with my food, with my transport, with my clothes, with my stuff. I was amazingly lucky because when I left my legal career and I came to the charity sector, predominantly as a volunteer, it really took the edge off because we'd cut our bills so much already. Sustainable living is for everybody. People will tell you it's about electric vehicles and solar panels, and it's just for middle-class eco-types. But 90% of sustainability is about reducing your costs. All of our grandparents, no matter what our heritage or our background, would tell us, reduce your waste, reduce your spending. So, we drive a lot less, we walk more, we use public transport. We've reduced our fuel costs by 50%. We don't buy stuff we don't need. We borrow things, we mend things. We buy secondhand. We've reduced the costs of what we spend on stuff by 50%. We don't waste food as much. We eat less meat and dairy significantly. And we reduced our food shopping bills by 1/3. And just by turning the thermostat down by 1 degree, we've reduced our energy costs by 10%, and we're doing other things there too. These are saving money, not spending money. Sustainability is for everybody, and if there's one thing I would hope that you guys would take home with you tonight, it is that it's relevant to all of us. Climate change is already affecting us in the UK, whoever we are. And at the moment, we are not on track to meet our own targets for reducing emissions and protecting our children's future by 2030. But we can all make a difference. You can make a difference. You can decide to do something today. And finally, if you choose to do one thing, and anything else that I've mentioned feels scary, but one thing, just find out, perhaps the first time, who your counsellor or your MP is, or both, and write to them. I get told by them all the time, no one ever tells us they're worried about air pollution, no one ever tells us they're worried about climate change, no one cares about net zero, that won't win us votes. It's because they think that you think it's irrelevant to you. Tell them, it's relevant to me, I care about it, what are you doing about it? Do better. Thank you.